thank you to everyone who who is joining us today from all over the world. We are really pleased to have you. I would like to quickly introduce Matt from Interpreter Now. He is handling the ASL interpretation for us. We also have somebody providing us with somebody from Caption Access, who is actually providing us with a live captioning of this particular conversation. So we would like to acknowledge these two individuals. I would also want to remind all of us that this event is a part of the Fall Makers series hosted by Illimitable, an organization that highlights and advances the global contributions of disabled innovators in science, tech, design, and entrepreneurship. We would like to thank our partner, the Disability Empowerment in Higher Education campaign, for collaborating with us on this panel event. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Edmund Asiedu, and I work with Columbia University as an Assistant Director of Career Services, and I am also a disability advocate. So without wasting much time, we're going to start, a quick introduction of ourselves, just to know who is in the room. And so maybe what I can do is I'll mention your first name from what I'm seeing, from, the Zoom, and then you can introduce yourself. So let's start with Alex.
Great. So hi, I am a computer scientist at the University of Toronto. So I'm doing my PhD at the University of Toronto. And my research focuses mostly on the intersection of biology and artificial intelligence. So we are really excited about artificial intelligence and biology because they can detect patterns and data are a lot more sensitive than that human experts can detect. So they have the potential to really revolutionize the way that we understand biology and enhance the depth at which we understand biology. I think one of the challenges of applying artificial intelligence to biology is that typically these AIs learn by rote learning. So for example, if you're working with images, you have to show an image, one image, and you'd go, well, this is a cytoplasm, and you'd have to show another image, and you'd go, this is the mitochondria, and then you do that over and over again for 10,000 or maybe a million images. So obviously that is really time-consuming, and it's something that we really can't keep up with if we're going to be able to understand biology using AI. So what I do then is that I try to create innovative learning strategies for AI. So instead of learning through rote learning, my AIs learn through ways that are more akin to how human beings learn. So they learn through puzzle solving, or they learn through exploration, or play. And then by doing that, they're able to learn about biology in these data sets without any human intervention. So I guess that's my research in a nutshell then.
Thank you, Alex. Let's move on to Gabi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gabi Serrato Marks. I recently defended my PhD in marine geology. So I am officially a geologist, geochemist. I'll respond to anything that starts with geo. And I am now a part-time science writer and part-time postdoc. So I'm trying to thread the needle between the two kind of career paths right now. But I study past climate change in Mexico. So I use stalagmites from caves, mostly in northern Mexico. And I use the geochemistry that I can kind of analyze within them to look at how much rain there was in the past. So looking forward, I'm not quite sure what my long-term career path is, but for now I'm in that middle ground.
Congratulations, Gabi.
Thank you.
It's great to have you as part of this conversation tonight. Let's move on to Alexis.
Hi, my name is Alexis Toliver. I am a neuroscientist. I am a fourth year doctoral candidate at Brown University. I study multisensory integration and its deficit in autism. It is quite a privilege to study autism, as I am autistic myself, along with other mental and physical disabilities. So I am also a disability advocate, and I am the co-founder of the organization, the Harriet Tubman Collective, which is a group of Black disabled activists. And I do a lot of disability activism work on campus, on the Campus Access Advisory Committee, and I work with Rhode Island Silk, as well as the Rhode Island Governor's Office.
Thank you, Alexis.
Yeah.
Thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing. So let's start the conversation. What role has your disability and other identities played in shaping your experiences as a researcher and scientist? So we would definitely start from Alex.
I can go first on that then. So first of all, I think that I just want to preface this by saying that I don't think there has to be any special reason why we make disabled scientists into scientists. Like, we don't have to bring anything special to contribute anything novel in order to be part of science. Because I think that, I mean, like, the whole point of building an inclusive academia is that we really want everything to be accessible to anyone, even if we don't see any special merit to bringing them into the fold. But that being said, I think that there are some special perspectives and unique perspectives that disabled scientists do bring to the table. And just talking about myself, I can see a lot of lines between my work and my disability. So the first and most obvious line is that, well, I work mostly with images, so I work with microscopy images. And obviously I'm deaf, so my world is a visual one. So right off the bat, there was a connection between, like, the way I perceive the world and the way I navigate the world and the research that I choose to do. The second thing is a little bit more abstract. So if I look at my scientific contributions, one of the things that I've had a habit of doing is thinking a little bit outside of the box. And specifically, one of the ways I think outside of the box is that I look at computational techniques and I go, well, these are the constraints that people always take for granted. So for example, to train an AI, people always assume that you need a lot of labeled training data in order to do that. So one of the ways that I contribute my field is I think about, well, if we didn't have those constraints, if we got those assumptions, would we still be able to do it just as well? Like, if we did not have labeled training data for an AI, would we learn it in some other way? And to me, that sounds a lot like the disability story. And I mean, it is, isn't it? So, I mean, like, I live in a world that I think is not systematically structured for me. And like, I still go ahead and create my own ways in navigating the world. I've adaptive strategies for navigating the world that let me to do things just as well or better than, like, able-bodied people. And I think that, like, the whole idea of looking at a situation and challenging some of the assumptions that people may take for granted when they don't have the perspective of navigating the world in a different way, is something that's very inherent to disability. So that is, to me, something that is very unique about the perspective that disabled people bring to science. The way we solve problems, the creative way that we solve problems, and the creative way we think about how to solve problems under different constraints or under different scenarios. And like, I mean, like I said, I don't think like, we have to bring this table into a table in order to have a seat at the table. But I think that that, like, science definitely benefits from having a skill, because that is a unique skill that we do bring to the table then.
Thank you, Alex. Next, let's move on to Gabi.
I really agree with everything Alex said. So I'll just add that a little bit about my perspective from my own disability, which is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So I have a chronic pain condition. Essentially, it impacts every part of my body. And there's lots of other stuff that goes with it too. So it's a complex and not a lot of fun most days, but I agree that it has made me a much better problem solver. And I think for me, it's had mostly a negative impact on my scientific career in terms of doing field work. So my job requires me to go to caves and take samples, look at different stuff, and there are ways that I could do that without going caving, and that would probably be easier, but at the same time I wouldn't get the same amount of information that I really need. And so my kind of stubborn thing has been that I go caving, I do all these things even though I pay for it with fatigue and pain and I get hurt, but I do it because I really love going caving and doing field work and because it's so important for my work. So it's been a challenge for sure, and finding other disabled advocates who can who have helped me really change my thinking, I think has been really helpful. So seeing it as, we deserve a seat at the table and it doesn't matter whether we have these genius ideas or we're just regular scientists or whatever it is, like sort of exactly what Alex was saying, has been a big benefit to me in the past couple of years.
Thank you, Gabi. Alexis.
So I identify with a term that I first heard by a disabled activist who's currently at Columbia University as well, named Saray, and I identify as politically disabled, which means that I not only am proud of my disability, but I politicize it in a manner to further decrease ableism, especially amongst our scientific community. So I am very open about the things that I need with my disability. I came in on my applications letting them know that I was disabled. And one of the things that I said on my application is the laboratory gives me the space as a person with Asperger's, as a person with mental disabilities, as a person with some physical disabilities. The laboratory gives me the space to think and process that some other spaces do not. And that is why I chose science, because there is more ability for me to process and understand things as a person and as a scientist. Sometimes I'm slower to understand things, and I have a boss who understands that. I have a tremor in my hands as a side effect of taking benzodiazepines due to anxiety disorders. And the disability office at my school is currently in the process of hiring someone to do tadpole brain surgeries for me. And so, like, what I would definitely tell other generations or younger scientists or older scientists, just scientists who are shy, is that you should be proud of your disability and not hide it. Politicize it and use it to decrease ableism. And when you need those resources that those able-bodied people don't need, make sure you ask for them, because under the ADA, under the law that was established, we are required to receive the help that we need. And so don't back away or shy away from asking for that help, especially as a science. In this field, they study us as they study our disabilities, and we should be able to study our disabilities our damn selves. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Alexis. That, throughout my life, that is what I've been doing, politicizing my disability, making people hear it. So I've been preaching in similar manner, just like Alexis just mentioned. And sometimes some of us who have been doing the like politicizing our disabilities, we feel like we always hope that everybody will be able to do that. It's just that, like, sometimes, like, it's really tough for some of our colleagues to be outspoken about their disability. But making people hear what you're going through, the kind of disability that you have, it gives you the platform to really advocate for yourself. I have polio, and I used to elbow crutches and a brace, and I always want to talk about it. And right after talking about it, I ask for what I need in order for me to be able to really function in my office space. So definitely everything that we have said, I am definitely, you know, those that I have not tried, now that I've learned about it, I'm definitely gonna do it. So let's all continue to advocate for ourselves and our colleagues with disabilities, not only physical disabilities, but also unseen disability, non-visible disabilities. Let's do that. Um, as much as we. Okay, good. So let's move on to the next question. The next question is, what challenges have you or others faced with disclosure in employment or educational settings? So this one will start from Gabi.
Is it because I'm looking for jobs, and so you know that this is on the top of my mind every single day? Yeah, I haven't quite figured it out yet, to be totally honest. Every job application that I'm filling out has a section where they ask like your general demographic information. So they ask, race, ethnicity, gender, a couple other things. And then there's a separate one, right, in the US at least, where they ask if you're a veteran. So I'm like, nope, not a veteran. And then there's a disability one. And I know that it's like so many different places, like this will not be considered as part of your application. And, the people who are deciding whether you're going to be hired or not aren't going to see this. It's different people. But at the same time, every single time I wonder, like, if I check this box, is that going to change my hiring outcome? And like, I need a job, right? So trying to figure out that disclosure, like in that very formal capacity, has been a challenge. But I've sort of landed in the camp that if I weren't hired or were ranked lower because of my disability, I wouldn't want to work there anyway. Like, it wouldn't be a good fit for me. The same kind of way that I feel about being queer, that if I were to hide that I'm queer and then they hire me because I've hidden it, like, I wouldn't want to work there. I want to bring my whole self to work. So I keep checking, yes, I have a disability, and it's not quite visible on my CV, I don't think. It's not something I put into my cover letters unless it's like an accessibility type job where it's super relevant. So for now, I'm kind of like finding that middle ground between, like, yes, if someone asks me about it, like, oh, I saw that you wrote this article, or can you tell me more about this? I would be happy to talk about it. But right now, it's not something that I'm putting like front and center, like stamp my resume as like, this is what I want to talk about. So that might change tomorrow or in a week, but right now that's kind of been my path so far.
Thank you, Gabi. Let's move on to Alexis.
So it's a challenge. I am a multiply marginalized person. I am Black. I am queer. I am non-binary. I am fat, which is considered a marginalization upon some, a disability upon some other, if you look into that situation. I have mental disabilities. I have developmental disabilities, autism. And so you wonder, will I be seen as a burden when you disclose these things? And I will admit, I have been in places where I have had bosses treat me like a burden. But because I am, as I said, politically disabled, and I politicize my marginal identities, and I accept my intersectionality as a human, because intersectionality is what creates us and what makes us better and pushes us forward and makes us unique. I definitely disclose that. And one particular organization that helped me move forward with disclosing that is a group called Disability In. It used to be called USBLN, and so I was honored to receive one of their awards and travel to their conference for a summer and they actually have employers on a scale, and it's called the DEI, Disability Employment Index, and it scores employees about their accessibility and their like willingness and helpfulness, and just their overall lack of ableism within their companies. And so I find that as a good source, and I'm definitely going to go through companies that are scored high with DEI through disability in once I'm on the job market in 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. So if you are in the US, Disability In is definitely a great resource, right? Just like Alexis mentioned, you can explore that in order to learn more about organizations that are truly inclusive. There are some organizations that are preaching, that they are, inclusive of everybody, including those with disabilities. But in reality, if you ask them what their policy, regarding hiring individuals with disabilities, they will not be able to tell you anything because they don't do it, right? So definitely, Alexis, that's an awesome resource. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Let's move on to Alex to hear from him.
One of the things that really affects my opinions about whether to disclose or not is that it's very obvious that I have a disability when I'm in a scientific context. I'm usually the only deaf person. So I'm the one who's signing the interpreter. I'm the one who's sitting in the front of the room. So I'm sitting in, for example, if I go to a conference, Oliver conference, thousands of people, they know that I'm the person there who has a disability. And I think that, I think that one of the ways that it's affected me is that I think it's forced me to be a lot more public about my disability as well. So I'm definitely identify as disabled on social media. If you Google my name, I have a bunch of pieces for intersectional journals about disability and how to interact with, for example, my queerness, or with being Asian and other of that. And it's even in my CV, I have a whole bunch of positions where I was part of community boards around deafness and queerness. So that's in my CV. And whenever I apply for application, I just put it out there, where I'm disabled and I'm going to bring a mentorship program to your university, for example, when I'm applying to faculty positions. Now, I think that, when it comes to the challenges of being very visible, I think that one of the things that it becomes really easy to happen is that it's easy for people to think focus upon your disabled identity as the only overriding factor. So I've had this both on a negative spectrum and then on a more neutral spectrum. So I've had more about discrimination. People walk up to me and go, "You're just an interpreter. How can people understand? How can interpreters understand very technical language in ASL? Are you even competent to be a scientist?" So people have actually overtly said that to my face. But that doesn't happen as frequently as I guess with the more frequent sort of interaction, where I'm at a conference and then someone approaches me and then they're just like, "Oh, it's so cool that you sang." And to me, that's always a little bit disappointing because I have someone approaching me and hoping that they would talk to me about my science and then see me as a scientist. But 9 out of 10 times, they'd talk to me about my disability, about saying how poor and beautiful ASL is, which is very tokenizing, by the way. And so sometimes I feel because I'm so much of knowledge in science, I feel almost like a bit of a zoo animal. Other scientists don't actually regard me as a scientist. They think of me as a disabled person. It's hard to hide that aspect of my identity when I'm out in public. So I think just to expand upon what some of the stuff that Alexis and Gabi has been saying, I think that for me, one of the challenges about being in I guess the academic system is that yes, advocacy and asking for what you need is definitely a big component of it. When I entered my university, going to the accessibility office and working out an accessibility plan that was tailored towards a graduate student, knowing that I would have all of these things that were very different from an undergraduate, who were mostly experienced with for example, going to conferences, going to lab meetings, all of these collaborations that I was doing. I would need accessibility structures for that. I think that that was one big thing that I had to negotiate. I think one of the things that goes a little bit unsaid about that is that when you are a new grad student or like a new professor or whatever entering an institution and you don't have prior experience, the problem is that there are usually no other disabled faculty, and especially faculty of like your specific disability that you can glean experiences from. So for me, when I entered my PhD, I had absolutely no idea how research was actually conducted, what my obligations were, things like that. I'm a first generation graduate student, so I had no family to advise me on this. So I did not know what conferences were. I did not know what the day-to-day plan of my schedule was. So I think my PhD was actually a lot of trial and error, like going and realizing, oh, I had to do this, and then going, oh shit, I don't have the accommodation to do this, and then trying to figure that out as I could just scramble on the go. So for example, I actually didn't attend conferences, which is really big in my field. Like you would tell a lot of computer scientists who say that like, students who do not have conference papers cannot even graduate or cannot even like, succeed in my field. Like you're usually expected to come out them at like base of like 1 or so in my field. So I did not actually go to conferences for 3 years. And that's because I had no idea coming into a PhD that this was an unspoken cultural requirement of me. And then I had to negotiate with the conferences who would pay for interpretation, like negotiate it with my school, get people to fly out my interpreters to these conferences because I needed interpreters that had specialized technical language and they could not source them locally. Like all of these challenges and complications. So that put me 3 years behind the schedule. So basically, I think one of the messages that I want to say is that yes, advocate for yourself, but at the same time, like I think it's okay if you don't know what you need from the very start. So like you don't have institutional experience to draw from, and that is one of the major ways that disabled people are disadvantaged in academia. And then the third thing is that we need more institutional experience within academia. Like, there is this education of graduate students, professors, who are like people in positions of power that have disabilities and can actually flag down the students and say, this is something that you need to think about, and this is like a structure that you will need in your lifetime.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alex. Quickly, we would want to move on to the next question. But the only addition that I can add, I think everything that we've said is definitely true and reality, because I would say that we are experiencing what it takes to have a disability and also face what? Discrimination, right? Nobody knows that than ourselves. We know it better than any other person, on earth. But for me, we will have to maybe like explore more, look for, let's say, resources, just like Alexis mentioned about disability and, what are some other resources? So for example, if you're in the US, there is this organization program, it's called Job Accommodation Network. They provide a whole lot of resources, that can definitely help you, even in terms of disclosure and all that. They host webinars. And so, if you can check their, their website, I believe the website is janatwork.org, I believe. Just Google Job Accommodation Network. You'll be able to find that, so that you can learn more about how you can navigate or handle these kind of questions. Okay, great. So let's move on. Now we've talked a little bit about the disclosure, how it might look like in employment and educational settings. Now let's talk about public disclosure. Nowadays, one area where public disclosure often comes up for researchers and scientists is personal branding, right? Tell me how you have approached personal branding and how you've determined whether or not to publicly disclose your disability identity. We will start with Gabi again.
For me, it's been much easier to publicly disclose than it has been to do the like specific employment disclosures or requesting accommodations. Like it feels much easier to talk to thousands of strangers on the internet than to one specific person who might decide whether or not to hire me, for example. So for me, it's been important for exactly the reasons we've talked about so far. It's been really important for me to talk about my disability and to talk about the successes and challenges, because I felt so alone when I was first getting diagnosed, and that was a long process by itself. So just having this underdiagnosed condition and then also being a geologist who tries to go to the field with this condition, I felt really on my own. And so I've tried to both talk about my own story and educate myself and kind of lift up other people's stories, because I don't want to just be like shouting about my problems or my successes when there's other people who have different opportunities and different experiences. So I'm still learning a lot. I'm definitely new to the disability and accessibility kind of movement, I think. So I'm still learning, but I'm happy to be publicly able to say, like, I am disabled and I'm proud of that. I'm okay with that. You can call me disabled. It's not a bad word.
Thank you, Gabi. Let's go to Alexis.
So, as we know, we live in an ableist world, especially when you look on social media. There are a lot of posts going around saying, like, back in my day, we didn't have autism. Back in my day, we didn't have ADHD. Like, posts like that. Especially I've seen in the Black community and the Latinx community. And so what a lot of the work that we do at the Harriet Tubman Collective is combat ableism within our communities and do more to teach and educate our communities about our disabilities, because ableism has had its role since the past. We were deemed as invalid. We were deemed as unable to work under capitalism. And so we were seen as lesser than, when we are really one of the greatest things imaginable. And disability opens us up to different realities and imaginations and things like that. And so I happily disclose in public, but I do want to acknowledge those that are afraid to disclose their disability in public. It took me a while to disclose that I was autistic. It took me a while to disclose all of my mental disabilities. It took me a while to disclose that I have side effects from my medicine to treat my disability that create more disabilities. Because sometimes people don't understand that. And I understand that people don't understand. So I try to approach it in a loving and compassionate way. But as Asada Shakur said, it is our duty to win. And so we as disabled people, it is our duty to speak out about who we are and be proud of ourselves in a world that looks down upon us. Because as I said, capitalism makes it look like those of us with disabilities are invalid or unnecessary. And the more power we give to ourselves just by saying, I am who I am, the less people can look down upon us, the less we can be deemed as different or other, or as in the Black community, we like to say special. We are special, but in a great way, not in a negative way. And so I encourage those who are out there who are quiet about their disability to speak up. It's okay. There are some of us out there who will just greet you with open arms or separate smiles or whatever things that you need to comfort you. And I understand that it's hard because we live in an ableist world.
Thank you, Alexis. Let's continue with Alex.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I am very public with my disability. And I think that the simple reason for that is because I felt lonely during my PhD. So I'll talk about some of the discrimination and some of, like, I guess, like both overt and then and neutral that I faced during my PhD. But I think what really made that discrimination worse was that there were no other deaf people or many other disabled people around me that I could go to and say, well, I've experienced this. Have you experienced this too? But were your strategies for dealing with this? There was no like community that I could tap into. I mean, I have like found that community, but not specifically in STEM. So like one of the things I was not able to do was like, oh, okay, I had this experience, and I was not able to kind of like solicit community's feedback to understand whether that experience was systematic or it was an individual thing. So I think that's the reason why like I decided to be public about my disability. I kept on thinking about, for example, there's probably other people with disabilities out there, other deaf people are also struggling in the same situation and coping with this loneliness, this inability to articulate their experiences in a systematic framework. And that's why I wanted to be like a person who was available out there and open to be contacted for those people who were out in the individual universities and struggling alone. But the other reason I think it's really important to think about, at least for me to think about being public about disability, relates to what Alexis was saying about community. I think that we need to shift the discourse around like disclosure around disability from an individual framework to more of a collective community framework. And to illustrate why, I want to tell you like one of my worst experiences with ableism during my PhD. And surprisingly, it actually came from someone else with a disability. So basically what happened was that I was on social media, and one of the things I do is that I document my experiences of learning accessibility at conferences. And I was going, okay, this should not go well. I was a little bit disappointed about this and all of that. And then all of a sudden, this other disabled scientist contact me and then goes, well, that's because you don't have effective strategies for coping with a disability. I know all of these other disabled scientists out there who are much better at handling disability about you. But personally, for you, we're holding a workshop on this. So you should come to a workshop and learn from us. So when I think about that, I mean, like, it gets me outraged because it's like, well, you have no idea what my intersectional circumstances are, for sure. You have no, like, you have a different disability than me. You have no idea what shoes are walking at all, right? Like, you can't apply your own individual situation. And obviously, I'm very happy for you that you feel like you've succeeded in the situation, but you can't map that onto my situation. So this is why I think that it's really important for us to think about like the broader community view rather than an individual view. Because I think one of the things that's easy to fall into a trap of is that we're operating in an individual framework. You go, well, we need to, I need to survive. And like when you think about prioritizing survival as like your primary like, thing that you have to do, you don't think about like the bigger picture, like about whether your behavior is benefiting you or if it's benefiting like all disabled people across the world. So, for example, like one of the things I really don't like is when people identify as, you know, like when they say I'm a scientist that happens to have a disability, or even worse, when they say I'm a scientist who succeeds in spite of my disability. Because, okay, fine, I understand people have their own ways of identifying, and I totally respect that. But when you look at that, what they're really saying is that, well, I'm different from all of the other disabled people. I'm the exception. I'm the one who has succeeded, and every other disabled people, the common norm for them is to fail and not succeed. So I think that is like the type of behavior that is born out of survival strategies. Like obviously, like saying that you're an exception, portraying yourself as someone who's very exceptional is a really great way to survive within academia. I think that is a way that people like, across all marginalizations have survived in academia, not just within disability. But when you look at that strategy, it's really harming the community. Like it's saying that, like, I mean, like you are involved, you're able to become a scientist because you're somehow different or better than other disabled people. And then what does that say about like other disabled people out there? So for me, I think that that's the other layer for why I really want to be like, public about my disability. Like I'm heavily involved in the deaf community, and I think heavily about like why I get to be a scientist and why I get to be successful in scientists, and why the majority of my community doesn't. There are a lot of factors behind this. Like for example, like I boast myself, and that gets me taken a lot more seriously than someone who signs and then gets and speaks to an interpreter. I don't look as disabled as like someone who signs, right? And then also, for example, many other privileges. Like, for example, my parents are a lot financially, and they were able to support me through a lot of my PhD, so I did not have to worry about expenses. So that's why I think it's really important to think about like a community framework. Like, when we think about challenging ableism within science, it's no good if we think about a challenging ableism that's only directed at our own individual circumstances alone. In order for us to elevate and actually address ableism in science, we need to be able to uplift everyone, not just say, well, I'm an exception and this is why I deserve these things. So I think that, different people obviously have different ways of enacting it. For me, being public about this is a way to constantly reinforce that message and then go, well, I have to think about not just myself, but also about my community as well then.
That was well said, Alex.
Yes, yes, I was gonna say that. Alexis, thank you for saying that. Okay, let's move on to our last question for tonight. So what can allies do to amplify the work of aspiring scientists and researchers with disabilities and chronic illnesses? We will start with Alexis.
So allies have a very big role and they don't understand it. So I always say my grandma is both my best friend and my greatest ally because she is what is deemed as neurotypical and she doesn't understand my breakdown. She doesn't understand my dislike for hugging and affection. She doesn't get it. But her love comes in the form of educating herself. And then she suffered a stroke 4 years ago. And my love as a non-physically disabled person is coming in the form of reading papers about walking and gait and how to rehabilitate yourself and how to maintain balance and things like that. So allies, I feel like education is the biggest thing that they can do to help. And then also, I hate to bring it to this topic, but disabled individuals are one of the largest populations of individuals who are shot by the police. We are the biggest victims of police brutality. We are the biggest victims of state violence. And why is that? Is it because the police should not be first responders? Is it that our social workers should be first responders? These are ideas. But one thing that I challenge allies to do is that if you see a person in distress, if you see a person especially mentally in distress, please, please try to work with them on a personal level rather than escalate the situation. And if you feel that calling the police will escalate the situation, please stay away from that because it puts us in situations where we are hurt by the police. And I'm not saying that I'm anti-police, even though I am. And I'm not saying everyone should be anti-police. I'm just saying that we are high in the victims we are one of the highest victims, around 60 to 80% in 2015 of shootings by police were committed upon our disabled community. And so one thing I challenge allies to do is to call another first responder, call a family member that can help in distress, call a social worker that can help in distress. Ask if the police officer is trained in this particular situation to de-escalate. I'm begging for our lives here. So that is one thing I want to say.
Thank you, Alexis. Let's see what Alex has to say.
Thank you for sharing that, Alexis. It's definitely something that impacts my community too. There's even an organization called HUD that law enforcement and how diversity impacts deaf people. So if you're interested in that, I think that would be a good thing to look at. And I think that one of the really frustrating things is that there's a schism between white disabled people and disabled people of color on this as well. Like in my deaf community, so these videos with white celebrities basically go say, oh, if you just interact with the police in a friendly way, they go violent towards you. Whereas that definitely does not represent the experiences of disabled people of color, and especially disabled people of color with multiple marginalizations and multiple disabilities. So thank you for bringing that up. But I guess getting to my take on the original question, which was about amplifying the role of racial issues in science. I think one of the things I'm kind of acute to is about the current situation where I'm seeing a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives pop up at different universities. Like, especially if you're applying for to be a faculty member now, many universities in the States and Canada require you to send out a statement describing your plans for equity and inclusion. Now, I think that is great, but I also think that we need to be very careful about the way that I think a lot of these initiatives are starting to treat identities of marginalized people under an employer as interchangeable. So remember when you're bringing in a disabled person, like, okay, so let's speak to my experience. I mentor a lot of deaf undergraduates at my university, okay? So for example, with one different undergraduate, he was really interested in being involved in student life. So I sat down with him and I described, okay, it's going to be really hard for you to book an interpreter 2 weeks in advance for every single event. Why don't you request an interpreter block? So to set every single week, and if you want to go and see a professor during that time, then you have to interpret the book whether you use it or not. There was another undergraduate that I worked with that was an exchange student from Malaysia, and he actually didn't know what accessibility legislation was here. So he didn't know that he would get an interpreter and the student would have to pay for it. He thought he would have to pay for it. So I started him down and I coached him through the accessibility legislation, okay? So I think that is the role of like an important reason for why you need to have disabled mentors within the university system. But what I'm increasingly seeing is that a lot of schools, when they target their diversity initiatives and the hiring initiatives, is that they kind of view all of these identities, like not just disability, but like, for example, in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of all of these accesses, as interchangeable. So it's okay if you swap me out with, like, for example, someone else. And no, that's not absolutely not the case. Like, I mean, like, it's true that like, there are other marginalized people out there, but the reason you want, specifically want a disabled scientist is that like you want these students to avoid falling through the cracks in the system. So there's obviously like a lot of room for intersectionality here, and I'm not ignoring that. But I think that like in the rush to I guess like put on image of being diverse, I'm seeing a lot of higher academic institutions where anyone to do. Like we just have to look diverse. But thinking what the underlying reasons and the benefits of having diversity are. So like basically this is what my message for universities, for grant funders, for all of that, for people empowered to do. Don't, if you want a disabled person, say that you specifically want a disabled person. Don't say I want a disabled person, but then you're also open to like all of these other marginalized identities. I think that like I mean like I'm open to security and also building coalitions between groups. But like there are reasons why we need to keep these things separate and target them at specific communities.
Thank you. Thank you. That's also really insightful. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Let's see what Gabi has to say.
I'll keep it short. I agree with everything that's been said so far. But I want to just make the point that we shouldn't always have to be the ones who request changes to move toward accessibility, and we being disabled people. So for me, I always use captions because I have brain fog, because various different reasons. I always use caption. I don't need an ASL interpreter, but I always make sure to ask the people who are organizing an event, like what kind of captions or interpreter or both preferably are you providing, and do you know how you're going to pay for that? Sort of just like pushing people to think about it. And I would like it if my friends, my colleagues were the ones who asked that also. And then we have 5 people asking instead of just the one accessibility advocate who keeps being like the squeaky wheel. So just take a step toward asking for what accommodations are available, whether the venue is accessible if we ever go to in-person events again, and pushing people towards that so that it doesn't always fall on disabled people to ask for things. And not just for what you need for yourself, but for what might be a possibility.
Thank you, Gabi. That is also really great. So what I will add is that, you know, as we are moving forward in our careers, one of the things that we want to do is, you know, try our best to be involved. And if I say involved, you know, let me put it in quotations, to be involved in a way that, for example, if you get hired by a university, you know, once you get in there, you are, you know, you become your own advocate, and especially if they don't have some policies and systems in place that, for example, will see to you making sure that you have an accessible, you know, working space, or you have what you need in order for you to be able to go about your day-to-day work, you know, as expected of you. You have to advocate for, you know, everything, sometimes like one by one. You have to do that, but we can change that, right? We can change even where there are some systems in place. We can still add more to it. And one way that I've been doing over the years is the fact that wherever I work, I make sure that at least I am serving on one committee, right? Like, try, even if they say, hey, this committee or all the committees are full, I will offer to be added as an extra person that will be serving on that board. And the reason why I push for these things, just to influence, you know, the decisions and, you know, some of the topics that will be discussed, just to make sure that things are being, you know, inclusive of individuals with disabilities. And if you ask me why, I will simply say that usually they forget about us, just like we have all said. They forget about us as if we don't exist. But if we are to head count employees who have disabilities, they will be surprised, because there are so many people with non-visible disabilities who do not disclose, just because of discrimination and stigma and so many challenges that we face. So if you get hired by a university, if you get hired by a research lab, make sure that you make your voice, you know, heard, not only, you know, people that are around you, but those who are in the other department as well. And you can effectively do that by serving on boards, by advising student organizations, you know, by building some sort of like allyship, getting people involved in order for them to be educated too. So that is, from me, what I have been, you know, practicing, and it's been working very well. And I believe that it can work with you as well, because we have to fight for generations to come. If in the United States, you know, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, and, you know, like sort of like we started implementing it like 30 years ago, and we are still fighting. In fact, ADA is actually under threat, you know, the issue of accessibility and everything. People want to change it, you know, but it's just because of some sort of like capitalism and, you know, ableism, you know, and everything coming into play. But we can fight that. We can fight that, you know, in so many ways. So let's work together to make this happen. Even if it doesn't happen for us, it would like a smoother world, or let's say, you know, academic institutions, faculties and all that do not hire individuals with disabilities as the way we want. Perhaps some generations after us, if we fight for that today, it might happen to the generations that will come after us. So let's continue doing what we've been doing.